Good evening to all of you. On behalf of TIE Mumbai, I extend a warm welcome to each one of you and to our very distinguished speakers today, Mahesh, Vyas, in conversation with our own Raj Nair of TIE Mumbai. Before I introduce the two distinguished panelists, uh, let me brief you a little. At TIE Mumbai, we have been holding webinars since the time the lockdown started. And by now, we've had 230 plus webinars with very outstanding speakers, attracting over 26,000 participants from 70 different countries worldwide. So please make sure you keep track of our events and join us at different webinars and listen to outstanding speakers and interesting topics. Today's topic is very, very relevant for the times we are in. We are all concerned about the pandemic and the demand having gone down. The business is suffering. We all know that. So we want to know, when will the demand return and when will the jobs return? Because we are all worried. Even if we may be working, we are worried about the unemployment across the country and the job situation, which has been certainly increased, magnified because of the pandemic. So we want to understand that in terms of economic terms as to when will the jobs return. So we have an absolute outstanding speaker for that, Mahesh Vyas, the MD and CEO of CMIE, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, Private Limited. I was talking to Raj Nair some time back that there is one data I 100% trust and track is CMIE data. And I would recommend that to everyone. If you want to know the correct data, the correct indicators of the economy, there is no better organization than CMIE. And if you want to listen to someone, there's nobody better than Mahesh Vyas. He calls a spade, and that is very unique about him and the organization. To briefly introduce, Mahesh is the chief architect of CMI's databases, which include Prowess, CapEx, and Consumer Pyramids Household Survey database. Prowess is India's largest database on the performance of Indian companies. CapEx is India's largest database on the implementation of investment projects to create new capacities in India. And Consumer Pyramids Household Survey is India's largest panel household survey. Mahesh writes regularly on Indian economy for CMI's Economic Outlook and other services. You would have read many of his articles. He also writes a weekly column on the job for Business Standard. His writings focus on labor markets, enterprises, and investments. These are systematically empirical based on the vast CMI databases. And as I said, the most reliable, most authentic data you can fully trust. And in conversation with him will be our Raj Nair, part of our TIE Mumbai board. For a long time, Raj is a strategy consultant, entrepreneur, and investor. He's the chairman of Avalon Consulting, Germinate Solutions, and AGR Knowledge Services. He's the immediate past president of Indian Merchants Chamber. He's as I said, been associated with TIE Mumbai for a long time. His previous roles include merchant banking at Greenlist Bank and consumer durables marketing. He graduated in engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, when it was Bombay, and in business management from IIM Ahmedabad. He was awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award and the Distinguished Service Award by the IIT Bombay. He's been a mentor to a number of startups and we have taken a lot of advantage for him in upgrading and improving the ecosystem in and around Mumbai for startups. He publishes an annual paper around New York, around the New York time on New York, and this year he is written on the tipping point, on the socio-economic front, and which we saw as the major changes that have happened during the year. So over to you, Raj, to get the best out of Mahesh Vyas and see that we all learn a lot more at the end of this today's discussion. So once again, welcome to Mahesh and Raj. And Mahesh, we're really honored to have you with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Atul, for introducing Mahesh Vyas and me. And to all the ladies and gentlemen in the audience, a very, very happy Diwali in advance. In the next 40 minutes or so, you will be able to figure out whether your next year's Diwali will be better or much better than this year's Diwali. So Mahesh, let's start our fireside chat by your telling me or telling us whether your wife thinks that you are an optimist or a realist or a pessimist. So over to you.
Well, the wife believes I'm an optimist, pessimist, realist, or anything in between, depending upon what her mood is. So we'll leave the wife out of this, and it entirely depends upon what the situation is.
Okay. But generally, are you an optimist or a pessimist by nature?
Well, you know,
or a realist?
As Atul Bhai had introduced me, I'm the CEO of CMIE. And I guess all CEOs are naturally optimistic. We naturally have to be optimistic, otherwise we can't run our businesses.
Correct.
So being a CEO, being the person who's running a company, doing all kinds of things, I am always optimistic on my business, on the environment around me, and I look forward to the business growing, the services growing, and so on and so forth. But you know, I'd like to temper that, because professionally, I cannot afford to be an optimistic person, or I cannot afford to be a pessimistic person, and I cannot be anything, because I am the slave, and my organization is a slave of the data that we see. If I were to be optimistic, even if some bad data came along, I'll say, no, it will turn around tomorrow. If I see some good data, I may say it can, get better tomorrow. So professionally, I perforce am compelled to remain neutral and neither be optimistic nor pessimistic, but just be a slave of the data. In fact, Raj, if I may.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So as for me, during bad times, people are so drowned in their misery that they think I'm a weirdly optimistic person. When things are all going hunky-dory and I say there is some big problem or imminent downfall, they think I'm just being pessimistic. But I think I'm an optimist, just as you said. We run businesses, we are entrepreneurs, we're investors. If we don't sow the seed today with the hope that there will be a harvest tomorrow, we cannot be entrepreneurs, or you can't be CEOs of companies. And I suppose that's a message to all the entrepreneurs on this program. You have to find a way to be optimistic, because pessimism will pull you down. I'm not saying be unrealistic. Look, like I'm not bothered by the dark clouds above me, which we all have right now. I don't even look for the proverbial silver lining that every cloud is supposed to have. Instead, I look for opportunities even in the darkness. Besides, I don't want the dark clouds to be blown away. I'd rather that it rains and on the parched land and I can sow seeds and reap a good harvest. So that's my outlook as far as dark clouds are concerned. I have to be optimistic and sow seeds now, but I want to use data and facts just like Mahesh does, because that's the nature of our work. Since today's fireside chat is about jobs and demand, let's start with demand. Mahesh, you're a storehouse of rich data at CMIE, as Atul has just pointed out, and you're a person who was time and again shown that you're able to make more sense out of hard data than most people can. I too come from a profession, strategy consulting and analytics, in which it's important for us to make data talk and data sing songs, which we can play to others so that they understand what the situation is. And therefore the solutions or the diagnosis is understood. I'm therefore very excited to have this session with you. You being the realist, I'm optimist, and I'm being the optimist. But we'll not lose sight of realism. See, right now we can hear government spokesmen and independent advisors or observers, and by that I mean economists, people from the financial world, even some from the business world. Of late, they've been quoting high-frequency indicators to show that we have almost reached the pre-pandemic levels of economic activity. They seem to suggest that things are almost back to normal, barring a second wave of lockdowns. So with the same caveat, I feel, however, that we could see a -6 to -8% fall in the GDP this year, that is FY21. And then probably by FY92, we'll see a growth of 8 to 10% on that low base, so that at the end of FY21, March 22, we are more or less in absolute terms where we are in March 2019. So there are two ways of looking at this situation. One is to say, oh my God, we lost 2 valuable years. And maybe in this process, we have had some structural damage. Therefore, the cup is half empty. Another way to look at it is that in order that we get to that place in FY22, where there's a degrowth this year and a good 8 to 10% growth next year, we will have to necessarily start seeing improvement in demand and in jobs right from next month onwards, at least, if not December, at least January. I'd expect December itself, things will start improving, and January it'll be more so. Even if this third quarter is sort of neutral, the fourth quarter will be positive, resulting in -6 to -8%, because after all, we lost 24% in the first quarter. So while we may be -6 to -8%, I can see the possibility of growth happening, optimism returning, jobs coming back very, very soon, a couple of months from now. So that's the glass half full. That's my perspective to get to understand the state of affairs. But what do you think? Because there's different reactions to the same facts. Do you see the economy going up from here, in particular demand for manufacturing and services sectors? What do you see? And can you share this, your evaluation of the situation with the audience, please? Half empty or half full?
Okay, so that's we are at a very interesting point in November when most of the data till September are available. Some more will keep coming in, but we have got a good sense of what happened in the first half, which is the half in which the pandemic played itself out. The lockdown was very, very effective, and we saw this 24% fall in GDP in the first quarter because of the lockdown. I mean, the economy shrank because the economy was made to shut down. This is clearly an effect which was effective in playing itself out. But what is interesting is sitting here now in November and looking at the data till September and some of them till October, is I'm really impressed, like almost everybody I know and I speak to, is impressed with the recovery. This is truly remarkable. When we saw the problem in April and when we used to hear stories about the vaccine coming out only, maybe 9 months away or 10 months away, it was the story of much despondency, with the lockdown playing itself, with those pictures of the migrants coming out and being hapless around, etc. That was really a very pathetic story. Compared to those days, we have recovered remarkably. I mean, so many indicators have actually come up better than or equal to what the numbers were before the lockdown. So whether you look at passenger cars or two-wheelers or tractors or, electricity generation, railway freight traffic. Many of them have done exceedingly well. A lot of it is partly because we had very good rains this year. We had excellent kharif crop. The summer crop has been very good. The government directed its resources towards the Manrega program, and that generated employment in rural India. And a combination of all these things have contributed to that spike in demand for tractors and two-wheelers, and then later even passenger cars. But as I summarize this, I see that we are getting misled by this recovery, which has been sharper than what we expected. And what has happened is when the economy was opened up in parts, but by around August or so, we had more or less relaxed the lockdown very substantially. And in September, we were more or less through with it, excepting for the large metros. We saw a lot of the pent-up demand come up again. And that pent-up demand, combined with the kharif crop being very good, and the festive season, all these have combined to get us up to where we are. And I think this will last till November. But I think there's nothing on the horizon yet to tell us what's going to happen in December and January. We require a little more confidence to see this sustain ourselves. So I think this is great. We haven't gone so deep into the pit that it will be very difficult for us to come back. So this is great. This is a bonus we have got. And this is something that we should build upon. I mean, this bonanza that we got of the kharif crop is really fantastic. We require to build upon this. So I think there's reason to be optimistic. There's reason for us to say, let's pull ourselves up from where we are, take advantage of this really rapid recovery and see how we can go ahead. But I would like to say that we got this ride more or less for free. There was no government initiative that made it. But we can't take such recoveries, automatic recoveries, for granted. So let's say good recovery, very good starting score, but let's build on this. Let's keep our optimism high, but let's also think through how will we wade through the winter.
So Mahesh, we both agree that the glass is half full. I feel it's filling up. And you're saying that don't take it for granted, but there are certain things we do, and there is hope that it can fill up. Okay. So now let's leave the demand side aside. We'll come back to that. But let's move on to jobs. Since liberalization in 1991, economists and others have been complaining that India has had jobless growth, just about 1% or whatever. You might be able to give a better figure. At the same time, I feel that incomes have gone up, labor productivity has risen. Most of us are much better off than we were in 1991. Our salaries, which were capped at miserable levels, have gone up. Youngsters are buying cars, there's loans available, consumer finance available. On the whole, I feel that if I look at any level of society in 1991 and look at them in 2020, forget the pandemic for a moment, but look at them at 2020, I see that things have progressed. So on the one hand, we're seeing good things happening, and on the other hand, we're seeing jobless growth. So can you please clarify the growth, this for us? I'll ask another question related to this after this, but on this point, can you clarify, please?
Yeah, you have touched upon a very interesting and a very a point that requires a lot of careful attention. Interesting things have happened in India in our lifetime. We have seen major changes happen from 1991. So that's when we, shed our past growth rates. We shed it maybe in the mid 1980s, but still 1991, 92 is like the most important turning point for India when we liberalized big time. And I think what has happened from 1991, 92 all the way till around 2011, 12 or so is that the economy grew at a rate of about 6.5% per annum. That's fantastic. In real terms, growing at 6.5% per annum is really very good compared to our earlier growth rates, which are close to 3% or so. Now, if you have a growth rate of 6.5% for more than nearly 20 years, Obviously, all the things that you're talking about, Raj, will turn out to be true. Our incomes are better, we are buying better goods, youngsters are buying cars, they are going for holidays and vacations of the kind that we had never imagined in the 1990s. So there was real growth, but there was no corresponding or anywhere close to growth in jobs. So just to give you numbers, I think GDP growth around those times was 6.5%, and jobs actually grew by a miserable 1.3% per annum. And our population was growing at 1.9% per annum. So obviously something weird was happening, but yet we saw, as you rightly said, our living standards were improving. What was happening is that people who were claiming to be employed in agriculture were moved out from agriculture and taken into factories. So people moved from miserable places like villages and farms where productivity is extremely low, that's mostly disguised unemployment. From disguised unemployment, they were moved into factories where they actually got employment and their incomes improved. They had a better life thereafter. But on a net basis, it was just this, that the people who are claiming they are farmers, now they are calling themselves as industrial workers. On a net basis, jobs did not grow, but the quality of jobs improved. The productivity of people improved. Their incomes improved. And that's what was the big change that happened in the 2 decades from the 90s till the first decade of the current century. But thereafter,
Go ahead.
After 2011-12, the situation is not as good. After that, investments have gone down, jobs have actually gone down, and we are seeing an increase in farm jobs now. Disguised unemployment is increasing again. So there is this major shift which is happening in the last 10 years where jobs are actually shrinking.
Oh. So now this pandemic has put paid to jobs. Okay. And there's demand also has been killed, as a result of which jobs had to be lost. Now there's a conundrum here. The demand can't rise unless jobs are there and purchasing power comes back. And jobs cannot be offered unless the demand revives, So how do you see things evolving from here if nothing out of the ordinary is done by the government? You brought to this point a little while ago when we were saying that, yeah, there's reason to be optimistic. We got here automatically almost, but now we need to do certain things to make it work. So what are your thoughts?
So yes.
Where do you see, if nothing happens, what will happen? We'll worry about what should be done, but if nothing happens, where do we go on the job front?
Well, like I said earlier, that we have to take advantage of this quick recovery that we have seen and build upon it. We cannot not do anything about it. But your question is, if we do not do anything going forward, I think it's a pretty bleak prospect going forward.
Okay.
We have been the worst amongst all countries in the world for government to step in and help the recovery process, the worst in the world. And just to give you a number, in the first half of the current year, central government expenditure grew by 0.6%, 0.6% compared to a year ago. That's all. And this is the problem. There is a lot of reallocation of resources that is happening within the government. So monies which are due to be spent on some ministries are being redirected towards, let us say, Manrega or health or something.
Isn't that a good thing?
No,
you're prioritizing your expenditure.
No, that is not. Because this reprioritizing doesn't solve it. Actually, to worsen the case for macroeconomics. It is actually shrinking demand. Our problem is demand. What the government of India needs to do is to increase aggregate demand. You cannot shift demand from one place to another. You may do that, but on an aggregate basis, your expenditure needs to increase massively. If you grow by 0.6%, and this is lower than what the situation was last year, we are actually, the government is actually working through this mechanism, knowingly or unknowingly, in reduction of demand.
Yeah, okay, so
dangerous part.
If I may intervene, KV Subramaniam said the other day that there is room for fiscal intervention and that the government might do some things. So to my mind, there are quite a few things that could be done by the government to nucleate demand. For instance, one option could be direct benefit transfer to the bottom half of the social pyramid so that they can spend and revive demand. The second is they can give tax breaks to consumers on purchase of specific things so that they can revive critical industries. So it's in some sense targeted. They're trying that through LTA and so on and so forth. The third is invest heavily on infrastructure like President Roosevelt did to pull USA out of the Great Depression, or even like our own Vajpayee did about 2 decades ago with his Golden Triangle. It really boosted the government, the economic growth in this country. So I'm not advocating one or the other. And you might think that there might be a fourth or fifth because of your knowledge. So what do you think the government could do out of these three or any other things? And what impact will it have?
You said many things, so let me try and take them one by one. If I miss something, please do prompt me. The first thing is that the chief economic advisor has said that there's room for more fiscal spending. But the finance minister has already said that they are going to spend a lot more, and there are schemes that have been announced. So there is no dearth of announcements by the government of spending more, but their accounts, their own stated accounts tell us that they're not spending. 0.6% is pathetic in an extremely bad year. So I think the most important thing that needs to be done is aggregate demand needs to be boosted up and government needs to spend. And I will even go out to say it doesn't matter what is the quality of the investment you made, but please push money into the economy. Please do spend. In the short run, it's very important to spend. Otherwise, the economy will shrink and that will increase the deficit even more. Now,
very valid.
Sorry?
Very valid point.
So let's come back. Thanks, Raj. Let's come back to the points you were making. Some DBT, some direct benefit transfers to the government, to the households of India, as a means of kind of pepping up demand a little bit. And I think this is what we should have done in April and May. The time for doing those direct benefit transfers and actually putting money into the pockets of people was in April the most, because that's when people couldn't earn, that's when people were distressed big time. There was still time in May. There was probably some time in July. But doing DBTs now is completely useless. That's the last thing to do. It will be equal to doing a short-term UBI, a universal basic income. And I think a UBI or a DBT at this time is an extremely bad idea for India. It's bad because we have an extremely low labor force participation rate. And if you put money into the pockets of people, they will work even lesser. So what I would say is something else. Please do more Manrega. Please do better Manrega. Please ensure you actually create assets out of Manrega. With that, you will have people working and being paid for the work that they're doing, and there's lots of work to be done. Please extend Manrega to urban India. Manrega is only Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Please make a parallel one for urban India and give guaranteed employment to build infrastructure there, to provide services there. In urban India, we all know, we don't get adequate services from the government. We have low police cover, we have low street lights, we have bad quality water, we don't have enough primary health centers in the slums if it is required over there, we don't have good education. Why doesn't the government of India and state governments and local governments create employment by providing better services? That's a way of boosting demand. DBTs is a bad idea because you'll just make us lazier than we are right now. The other point I think you made was about tax breaks to help people buy some goods.
The government is already talking about that.
Yes. And I think that is even worse, Raj, if I may. It is worse because with this, we are interfering in the markets for goods and services. We are picking possibly those industries that we like as against those that we don't like. This cherry picking is bad. It sets a bad precedent, and it's what we have done in the past, giving a tax concession here, giving a tax concession there. These are not sustainable ways of growing. But if you do something which is sustainable, then don't interfere in the markets by cherry picking, is my view. And I think the last point you made was very nice, was about doing what Roosevelt did to US, what Vajpayee ji did for India in the Golden Triangle. I think that's a good idea. So a combination of Manrega and a similar, urban Manrega, add to that, but these should deliver service. They're not putting money into the people's pockets freely, and it's possible to do it. The second thing is do a Roosevelt Vajpayee kind of thing, but remember, we need to also pick our examples cautiously. The Russians did the same thing that Roosevelt did and Vajpayee did, and made a mess of Russia. So we need to know how to do it correctly. So we just can't blindly believe in it. We should do it correctly.
Okay, so we should go, actually, Ty should go beyond this session and make some recommendations to the government right now before the budget about the kind of things that they should be doing. But that is another subject. Now, you said certain kinds of desirable interventions are there and certain undesirable. Now, I completely agree with what you said. Now talk about growth. We're trying to revive economic growth. I think GDP growth is a failed measure of progress. Its sell-by date is over. I'm not suggesting that we go for gross domestic happiness like Bhutan did, but I think it's about time we start using this real GDP growth rate as a primary or sole determinant of progress, and let it be one part of a more equitable, balanced model, like some kind of a economic development index, and not a one-sided thing. Let me clarify this thing. It's like saying I'm going to drive to a destination using only the speedometer. The most sensible thing, everyone here in the audience will agree, is to use a speedometer, use Google Maps, use road signs, use the various gauges in the car, and then you'll get there safely and on time and well. So similarly, it is possible to do develop an economic index, economic development index. I'll give an example of why GDP is a bad indicator. Take the case of Ireland. In the year 2015, they went and registered a 26.3% growth in GDP in 1 year. Amazing. With the result that today, the per capita GDP in Ireland is the 4th highest in the world. But has life changed for the Irishman? No. What happened was Ireland reduced the taxes so much and made so many concessions that most tech companies decided that they will park a lot of their profits in Ireland. The GDP, for instance, some of them moved their, or rather housed their IP in Ireland. So all the royalties that were earned on IP went to Ireland, and that added to Ireland's GDP. But if you look at the post-tax outflows of these companies, you'll see that the money didn't remain in Ireland. So the Irishman did not get any better. But the GDP is the 4th, per capita GDP is 4th highest in the world. So that is itself an example to show that it's a myth. It can be made a myth. I'm not saying GDP as an indicator is bad, but it should be balanced with a whole lot of other indicators. So for instance, now, if I were to ask Mahesh, if I were to ask you, what kind of other factors will you bring in to create what I call as a GDP, economic development index? Or do you think it's a rubbish idea?
No, it's not a rubbish idea. It's just that such an indicator is not well developed. There's a need for us to develop it. So many people have tried to develop alternate indicators to GDP. Gross national happiness is a good one from Bhutan and others. Bhutan comes first actually on that. But so there was the Human Development Index, for example. And there is the economic development efforts being made. So France had tried that. They engaged economists like Amartya Sen to come up with a better indicator of economic development. And there's no better person to work on such a subject than Amartya Sen. And there were many others, of course, distinguished economists in that effort. But it was mostly sponsored by the French government, who was very far-sighted in thinking of that project. But it was difficult to come out with a project with an alternate to the GDP number. Usually, what happens is we look at a combination of life expectancy, education level, and income of people. So, combination of these three broadly tell us what the development indicators of the country are like, or what the human development index is. But when you make an index out of it, there's too much of subjectivity involved in how much weight do you give life expectancy, how much do you give to education, how much do you give to income, and these anyway have a bearing upon each other. If your life expectancy is good, then your income will be better. If your education is good, your income will be better. If your income is better, then your education and health is also better. So this goes into a kind of snake eating its own tail kind of a problem. So I think what's important for India, I think there's a problem regarding how good is the GDP. The GDP obviously is an ancient old thing. Richard Stone did it more than a century ago. But today, we require to get a better indicator, and we are not getting anywhere close to it. In India, I think, and here is where, Raj, I think I'm trying to make an important point in response to your question, is that we have a terrible GDP estimate. We estimate our GDP extremely badly. Arvind Subramanian, who was in the government, after he stepped out of the government, said that we are overestimating our GDP growth by 2 percentage points. He could say that within the government, but it's important and remarkable that he said it after he left the government, which means he has inside information to be able to say something is wrong with our GDP numbers. Can we fix this? Let me tell you something which is more well known. It doesn't even require someone to do this in the manner in which Arvind did it. The National Sample Survey Organization estimates the household income of India, or household consumption expenditure of India, more correctly. Household consumption expenditure of India by the NSSO is half of that which is used in the National Account Statistics in the GDP. The same organization, exactly the same organization, says our consumption expenditure is X, and another one says, in another report of the same organization, it is 2X. Now, if it was X, then 10%, 5% here and there, we could understand. But this is 2X and growing. Let's get our GDP numbers right. And I think that is our biggest problem. The second thing is, all studies done in the past say, so far, the best indicator we have to tell us everything, to explain everything, is per capita GDP. I'm saying, even if we get that right, if we stop being at the lower end of the lower middle income countries in the world, I think it will be great.
Okay, point taken. Now, there is another point which I want to shift to, urbanization. Urbanization is a very important and long ignored factor in social development in India. Urbanization is very important because people in urban areas get far better access to education, to healthcare, and jobs than people in rural India. And your point about doing Manrega for urban areas is a very important thing. If that happens, they can have more urbanization. Just to put in perspective for the audience, urbanization in India is only 34.5%. That means out of 100 people in India, 34.5% lives in urban India and the rest in rural India. But the average for the world is 56%. Now you can see a strong correlation, if I give you some statistics, about the correlation between the degree of urbanization and how well that country has developed. Japan has 91%, USA has 82.5%, UK has 83.7%, even the Democratic Republic of Congo has 60%, or 80% rather. China has 60.6%. Now leave these countries on one hand, and then you take Indonesia. Indonesia is 56%, which is the world average. And now come to the third bucket, which is Bangladesh, 36.6%, Afghanistan, 25.8%, and to remind you, India is 34.5%. So clearly, if we are able to smartly increase our urbanization, then some of our job problems and economic development and social development indices also can grow. And for entrepreneurs, it can be a great thing. So what do you think about this? Isn't urbanization a huge business opportunity which we are missing for some reason? Mahesh, can you just give your thoughts on this aspect? Because it's important for business to have higher urbanization. It's important for jobs to get higher urbanization. It's good for everyone. But why haven't we planning that?
I think this is a very important point you have raised, Raj, about the importance of urbanization. And I think by now we have forgotten our skewed priorities till about 15, 20 years ago, which is we had this special interest in developing backward districts. These were largely non-urban, they were largely agrarian and were extremely backward with very poor productivity. Now, if you have a policy like development of backward districts, you force entrepreneurs to go into areas where they can hardly survive. So they are going to ask you for more shops. So it's good that we have put that development of backward districts behind us, and there is greater interest now in urbanization. I think the Modi government, early in its tenure in the last government tenure, started the smart cities movement, and there was a lot of expectation around smart cities. The project became less ambitious than it promised to be in the beginning. In the beginning, it looked like we were going to make smart cities. Then it became we are going to make portions of some cities as smart cities. Then it became others will have to figure out how to make some portions of some cities smart cities. So this whittling down of that ambition was a big disappointment. But I think the idea is still very valuable. I think the idea of making smart cities, enabling urbanization is very important. Urbanization ensures that not only do you get economies of scale in that place, but you get network effects. You go to Tirupur and you will find the network effect of all kinds of people associated with the ecosystem of Tirupur all found over there. It can't be spread all over the country. So urbanization is about creating network effects. Bombay is a financial hub. Hyderabad could be, a kind of a film hub. Tirupur could be a garments hub, and something else could be a different hub. Cities don't have to be the same everywhere. They have to have their own character and create the network effects of that kind. So if private businesses can envision such an economies of scale, such an environment of specialization in some places, I think it will make a huge difference to India. Our urbanization numbers, by the way, are extremely problematic. So there have been studies using nightlight signals to show that our urbanization is higher than what the official numbers are telling us, or different at least. And in the 2011 census, we raised our urbanization numbers substantially by creating what are called as census towns. Census towns are almost like large villages. So the government needs to support with better data on what is an urban place, what is an urban agglomeration, and separately we require to have an urban development ministry that ensures that urbanization is a fantastic science. Dr. Rakesh Mohan was an urban development economist. We require many more of that kind to create a really vibrant urban India. I mean, 80-90% is far away. If we can reach even Tamil Nadu's 50-51%, I think that's what
exactly. So I'm saying that can we not take it, have a target that we should go from 34 to 56 at least, which is the thing that can make huge difference to jobs, huge difference to education, huge difference to infrastructure and demand. And private sector and the government should align their interests to make sure that this is pushed.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Fully agree. There's another thing, private sector, do you think that private sector will actually invest in more manufacturing capacity to create more jobs in the short run. I think there is all the reason why they should, because the government has improved, has brought in these new labor laws. It has started announcing production-linked incentives for indigenous production of electronics, chemicals, pharmaceutical ingredients, so that there's incentive to produce in India rather than depend on China or wherever. Now, with all that, do you see investment happening in manufacturing in India?
Well,
Or increasing?
first I will say that any policy which is inward looking and protectionist is not going to survive. It's against our long-term interest to build an economy that says that, don't import from China, don't import from somewhere else, do everything indigenously. I remember in CMIE, we purchased our first computers in 1983, 1984, completely indigenously developed in Bangalore. We shipped it over here, and it took months to just assemble it and get the entire software working on top of it. If we had continued with that policy, we would never have seen the IT boom that we saw. We would never have created the best jobs that we have created in India so far. So let's not go back to a protectionist India.
I don't agree with you there. I don't agree with you there in the sense that, yes, inward-looking import substitution is a bad mantra. I completely agree. But if you do it in a sensible manner, it can be different. And I'll give an example without naming the company of a fan manufacturer, which became unviable because of the competition from unorganized sector, and decided to import fans from Japan and put their brand and sell it. A well-known brand. Their market just took off because the price point was completely different, and they just went up and up and up. And they reached a level where they felt, look, at this level of business, I can put up a fantastic plant in India, which will be highly productive and for which the cost will be even lower than bringing from China. So it worked on a very sensible strategy. I've seen the same thing happening in the case of small motors. So there are many examples of where you can manage to create scale and create world-class capacity and then bring industry in. But just saying that I'll still remain a small company instead of a government announced and says, as long as you make something in India, I'll give you production link incentive. There I agree. But it's time for us to think differently. That actually brings me to the next question, next issue. What I'd like, I'm addressing, let's address the audience now, okay, rather than each other. India, most of ladies and gentlemen, account for 16 to 17% of the world's population. What we have to understand is that this 16 to 17% of the world's population lives on 4% of the land area. So we are crowded, we are just jostling for space. And this 16% or 17% lives off 2 to 3% of the world GDP. So now if you start saying, I'll do import substitution, we're going to eat into that tiny thing only and not really go. Instead, if we were to say, look, let's stop thinking of creating businesses for this 2% or 3% of the world GDP. Let's attack the 97% which is lying out there. We have certain cost advantages. We have some skilled people. Can't we think of putting up projects which are meant for the world? In which case, we won't have to lament about, oh, capacity utilization during pandemic has come down to 60% or 65%. It's creeping up to 70%, and we'll invest when it goes to 85%. That's a sick way of thinking. Why not actually the big businesses and even entrepreneurs start thinking of the world as a marketplace? In fact, this is a question addressed to the mid-sized and large companies, not the young entrepreneurs. Generation X and Generation Y got it wrong. Generation Z and the millennials are thinking of the world as the marketplace. There are so many examples in the technology field, especially, where young professionals have set up businesses and are now ruling the world. They've created unicorns and so on and so forth. What's to stop our large manufacturers from thinking of the world as the marketplace? In Europe, every country looks at it that way. What's so special about India that we should be so backward in our thinking and say we should live off 3% of the world GDP, because our GDP is not going to rise rapidly over the next few years, unless we do some fudging like Ireland did. So why not look at the world? And what's your view, Mahesh?
Well, we have the same set of entrepreneurs who are reluctant to invest into manufacturing and are enthusiastic to invest into some new technologies. I see them as data points for us. I see their behavior, that they are picking to do X and not willing to do Y. They are not willing to necessarily compete in the world markets for manufactured products, and they may have good reason to do so. And
no good reason. Sorry.
So I can't write off their actions. I mean, entrepreneurs don't speak better than their actions. If they put money on the table, I note that.
That's it.
The entrepreneur is willing to actually do something. When the entrepreneurs take money away from the table, I see that as an observation. Independent of what they say in their AGMs, independent of what the chairman's speech is saying, independent of what they talk to the press. Now look at what the entrepreneurs are telling you in India. In the last 25, 30 years of the corporate sector that I've been studying, all the way till around 2014-15, entrepreneurs took away around 25% or so of the profits as their dividends. Post 15-16, so from 16-17, they have been taking away 60% of their profits from the table.
They're not reinvesting.
They are not investing. Look at this as their data. They're talking eloquently over here saying that we have got no confidence in this place to invest.
No, but isn't this a result of their mindset? The mindset is that our market is India. If there's some surplus, we'll export. Instead, they should say, look, we are so lucky we got a large domestic market. We can dream of a large capacity to attack the world market. We'll go in for quality. There's no manufacturer of equipment in the world which will say, sorry, I won't sell it to you, you're Indian. There's no technology supplier who will say, sorry, we won't give you technology because you're Indian. It's our mindset. It's our mindset. Our businessmen have for too long bred on this mindset of domestic market, domestic market, domestic market. It's about time they learn lessons from some of the youngsters and say, we will show the way. We will create world-class capacities and fight in the market. Figure out what it takes to win. I'm not saying go blindly and put up a huge capacity and get stuck. There are ways to study the market and figure out where your competitive advantage can come. What's your strategy? Build your capacity to that and go after the market. But you can't sit here and sit and crib that my capacity utilization is only 60%, so I can't invest for the next 5 years. Then this country is ruined. What do you say? It's a mindset problem. It's not a real problem.
Well, I disagree with you, Raj. It is the same mind which behaved in one manner till recently and is behaving in a different manner now. The mindset was export oriented in the 1990s after liberalization. We saw massive increase in our exports. We got a lot more integrated into the global value chain system, into the global manufacturing value chains. So it's not only about IT and ITES.
Yes, I agree. I agree. But you see now, Mahesh, if you look at even our exports to US, we hardly cover 3 or 4% of all the items they import. China covers 72% of all the items US imports. That means we are not there. We are not in any supply chain. We just accidentally or by some device got into some supply chains. But by instinct, we want to serve the domestic market. And we're very happy when you say that now we've got 30% of our revenue as export. It should have been the other way around. We've got 70% export, 30% of the domestic market, at least in areas where we are competitive. I can understand there are certain things where we cannot be competitive. And then we say, oh, wow, look at the small scale and MSME. They account for 40% of our exports. Of course, they have no choice. But the big guys just sit and want to exploit the domestic market and then complain. So how do we need to change the mindset of our are business people, whether they're services or industry or manufacturing. There are enough number of examples, and some examples you give, or the dyes, dye subs, and so on and so forth, where there's exports. Exports their mainstay. Why can't we learn? What's to stop? It's the mindset. But I don't want to labor this point too much, because there's the other point about labor. We are 16% of the world population, or 70% living on 4% of the land area. Isn't it about time we exported people? I put it in a different way. See, supposing Germany needs 100,000 nurses. Why don't we allow German training institutes to come and set up training facilities whereby they'll train nurses in the methods and customs used in German hospitals, teach them German languages, teach them social skills for German, and we should not bother that it's a 100% owned training institute. This can then probably, instead of Germany alone, there may be 10 other countries. We might be able to export a million nurses. And this can be repeated across sectors. So if we can think our new education policy is good, but it has vocational things. And we can create a huge number of jobs, and we need to, because we are 16% of people living on 4% of the land area. We have to send them out, but they have to be useful to the countries they're going to. So allow the training, them to come and train in India, teach here. Don't put restrictions on them saying you need 80% domestic investment or this or that, all kinds, no repatriation of profit. Just say, come and train our guys and take. What do you think about it? It's a foolish idea, or does it make sense? I'm saying it in the context of the fact that we've got a big problem, too many people.
So, Raj, you make some very important points, and these are points which are actually more relevant for the government to pay heed to, and allow, say, for example, the German companies to come and set up training institutes over here, educational institutions over here, so that we can produce trained nurses that can be useful, that can be used for the government to export, to enable export of labor. World trade organizations and other international bilateral and multilateral arrangements have made it very difficult for export of services. And export of labor is the most difficult part in that entire game. So I think our surplus labor being exportable is the biggest challenge that we have. We are facing that in H-1B visas, for example, in the US. We will be facing that in Europe in another big way. So I think this is a more intricate problem. This is a problem which is not only about our entrepreneurs over here and the government's ability to enable those things, but also a case that the world may not be easily accepting the labor that we may be exporting. There will be some niche places where this will work, and I agree with you, we should exploit it. But I think, coming back to your earlier point, Raj, I will agree with you on one point, that entrepreneurship in India probably requires to be a lot more entrepreneurial than it has been ever in the past. So we have to scale up our entrepreneurship in India in a big way. I'll agree with you on that. How is something that consultants, engineers like yourself advise them? I'm merely a social scientist making observations that entrepreneurs are not willing to invest under these conditions and are willing to invest in those conditions. I make observations, I generalize from there. And what I'm saying right now is the conditions in India today are not conducive for investments, whether it is capacity utilization or the threat of a tax raid on you, or your banker not willing to take a call on you, or it could be anything else. All said and done, the entrepreneurs are telling us that they are not feeling very happy investing in India right now.
I think the entrepreneurs who don't want to be real entrepreneurs are complaining. Those who are smart have gone and done it before. And we have seen examples in the dyes and dye stuff industry, in the garment industry, in the IT industry. There are any number of examples. It's just that they have not made a concerted effort to change their mindset. But on that happy note, I'd like to thank you for this brilliant exposition of ideas from your side. We have covered, before opening up to the audience for questions, I'd like to say that we've covered a lot of ground. The main question about when the jobs and demand will come back, and that will be probably from in a month or so, it will start increasing. What the government could do to nucleate demand is what we covered. We covered how investment in social infrastructure and making extending Manrega to urban job creation is going to be a good thing, and it should go beyond just creating hard infrastructure, but social infrastructure also, because there's a shortage of social infrastructure, and social infrastructure creates more sustainable jobs. And how the mindset of private sector I've learned from Gen Z and millennials to look at the world and not forget this, and this constantly remind yourself of the 16-4 mantra, 16-4-2 mantra. I now invite questions from the audience. I believe there are quite a few questions here. Depending on the time, I think I'll read out the questions, and most of the questions will be for the wise guy, that is you. So the first question is, if the government expense goes up, then the fiscal deficit will go up. Why are we recommending it? Mahesh, yourself.
If the government does not spend, then the economy will shrink faster and will shrink more. And therefore, the denominator will become smaller and the deficit will be bigger anyway. Okay. So if you don't spend, you will have a higher deficit. If you spend, you at least have a hope that the denominator will grow fat enough to compensate for the increase in your deficit.
There is another question. Maybe the good idea to have an expenditure index then probably meant than the GDP, where expenditure is tracked by measurable products such as cement, steel, automobile, two-wheelers, etc. It would be a better indicator of economic development. The basket of products should be based on what people buy as they improve their standard of living, and could include even white goods. So there's an economist who's got this view. What is your view on this?
So this problem is actually addressed. So you have GDP actually consists of two parts of the same coin. One is called the GVA, the gross value added, and the other is called the GDP. So GVA is the output of agriculture, industry, services, which includes all the items that you mentioned. And GDP is the income that people earn through wages and profits and dividends and interest and so on and so forth. So GVA is the expenditure side and GDP is the income side, and the two broadly do tally. So this is already taken into account in the national account statistics.
So there's another question. What happens to rural economies in case of rapid urbanization? So they're not against urbanization, but they're saying, look, what happens to rural guys?
No, they shrink. They just move to urban centers and they lead a better life over here.
Yeah, and they get better education, they get access to healthcare and everything. It's good. And then the problem of supporting the rural economy, which is shrunk, becomes easier to deal with for the government, right?
Yes, yes.
Now, there's a question about Indians who don't work very hard here. I'm not generalizing it, but when they go abroad, they work like crazy. What's this mindset issue?
This is an old behavioral problem, which is not peculiar to India, but it is more pronounced in India. We have seen people not working in their home states. Kerala is a good example. People in Kerala are usually very happy to have labor unions telling why they cannot work, but work extremely hard, very intelligently, very productively in any other part of the world. So this is not peculiar to only Kerala. It is the case. Ask the question why Biharis don't work aggressively in their own state and they work aggressively when they are there in other states. So it's something in behavioral problems. In India, the situation, this was studied by some sociologists. And the concept in India, this is very peculiar to India, the concept of doing a salaried job 2 generations ago was taken to be an insult. The Hindi word for a salary job is naukri. And naukri means somebody's knocker, which means you're somebody's servant, a civil servant, for example. So it's good to be your own boss. You own your land. You're a feudal lord is better. Being a businessman is better. But doing a salary job is not a good thing. So there are many sociologists who have understood this, but this is behavioral economics.
So there's another question, says, what's the use of this Manrega? Half the village digs a hole, the other half fills up the hole. Isn't it true that President Roosevelt also addressed this question? He said, I don't care if you dig up a hole and fill it up. There's some work being done, some employment and some economic activity. What is your reaction to this question?
So the first thing
is it a case of digging a hole and filling it up? Is that a realistic observation? And secondly, if it is true, is that a problem?
See, largely, yes, it is about Keynesian systems of half the people digging the hole, half the people filling it. It need not be that way. There is really a need for creating a bund, for creating a nala, for creating a canal somewhere. Some of the work is really truly good, but most of it is not. It can be better. But even if, and I'll say, even if half the population is digging a hole and half the rest of them are filling it up again, mind you, they go and buy tractors after that. So the economy comes back into buying things, selling things, and then eventually those guys who are digging holes and filling them up start making tractors as well, buying two-wheelers. So it's a means of kick-starting the economy. It's not the way it needs to remain forever.
So there's a question saying that, Indians go outside India and work hard because they get better salaries. I'd like to answer that question and get a more sensible answer from you. If you take the example of Kerala, the Keralite in Kerala does not work hard. This used to be the case, but things are changing now. But the same guy in Delhi, same guy in Chennai, same guy in Bangalore, same guy in Bombay works twice as hard. The salaries are the same. It's not as if but there are jobs. But salaries are not very different from urban Kerala and urban Maharashtra. What is your view on this point? Is it only the salary that make them work hard, or there's a psychological issue or a sociological issue? Or
it's a complex issue.
Sorry?
Biharis and Udiyas and the rest of them come to Kerala and work. And Malayalis go to the Gulf or go to other places and work very hard. I don't think there is any problem in this. It's perfectly fine if there are people who migrate depending upon what their skills are, what their is it a sociological problem that a Malayali does not like to be working hard in Kerala, and it doesn't matter what he does, wherever else he does it. Is that a sociological problem? Is it something else? But whatever it is, migration is a very healthy thing. People should migrate where there are jobs, move in and out to find the best equilibrium.
So now we're running out of time, and I can see Naveen getting restless. So I'll hand it over to him to thank you. But from my side and on behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank you, Mahesh, for a very, very interesting session with you. Naveen,
thank you very much.
Over to you.
I enjoyed this session as well. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mahesh. It was really great. And thank you, Raj. Please join in thanking them.
Mahesh and Raj, thanks a lot. Really appreciate a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye to the audience, which has been patient. Thank you.